Hey guys, it's Jack the Vegan Dad here. Today I just want to discuss about the vegan protests in Melbourne recently. Now, obviously it's all over the news at the moment, especially in Australia. I'm not too sure about around the world, but especially in Melbourne where we are based. So if you weren't aware, there was about 100 vegan activists who stopped in the middle of an intersection in the heart of the Melbourne CBD, right out the front of Federation Square and Flinders Street Station, which is apparently the #1 tram intersection in the world. So they probably definitely chose the most busiest area to set up shop. So obviously it frustrated a lot of people as they set up shop around about 8:30 in the morning. So people were still trying to get to work. So obviously a lot of frustration for many people came from the fact that the chosen location wasn't ideal. But at the end of the day, this is the reason why people protest, to kind of stretch the norm so they've been seen and can be heard and get their message across, which they effectively did to some degree. Obviously, there's been a lot of backlash against vegans because a lot of the media are just putting it out as vegans, not vegan activists or vegan extremists or animal liberation, which is what they were. They were after animal rights. So there's a lot of people here who choose to be vegan and would not go to these extremes. But at the end of the day, the message was very clear that they want more rights for animals in Australia and around the world. So obviously they're chasing some transparency for people in regards to slaughterhouses. So one of the biggest things that I found since the protest was a lot of vegans are worried for themselves and scared that, this is a big backlash and a step behind for the veganism push. My perspective is very different to that. I actually feel that it is a step forward. So obviously there are a lot of frustrated and angry people, a lot of people lashing out at vegans because of what happened. Of course, not all vegans are that extreme and will go to those lengths to set up a protest right in the heart of Melbourne. But the same message still applies to every vegan, that we care for the animals and the environment and want to reduce our impact in these regards. So the vegan protest obviously just had the animals' interest in mind. What was a bit of inconvenience for some people getting into work and getting around that protest compared to the suffering that a lot of animals have in these cages, in these slaughterhouses, in zoos, everything, So this was a minor inconvenience to a lot of people for the big message. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the news media is kind of swaying it very one-sided, kind of in that era of fake news. So both sides of the story aren't actually being portrayed very well. A lot of the stories are just focusing on the negatives and not actually highlighting the fact that the whole reason they were there was to push the 1-year anniversary of the Dominion documentary and to kind of highlight the facts or highlight the footage that was shown in that documentary and kind of make more people aware about that and push their agenda of better rights for animals. Unfortunately, a lot of the media didn't actually highlight the Dominion documentary at all, just purely the fact that people were inconvenienced by vegans. So a lot of people might find that their actions were aggressive and un-Australian, apparently, according to Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister. But there was actually nothing that they did wrong. There was, as far as I'm aware, there was nothing illegal that they did. They were in a public place and it's their Australian right to be able to protest peacefully, which they did. So there was an animal liberation Facebook page that was live streaming it. So they showed all the protesters calmly just standing there and peacefully talking to people who wanted to be spoken to about it. There was a couple of people that was chained to vehicles to show their stance, so they're not moving until their voices are heard and the animal voices are heard. Not one person was aggressive or violent, or any actions that they made were aggressive or violent. They just held signs. And a lot of them held signs of what their actual profession is in day-to-day life. We had teachers, we had doctors, we had general managers, an array of people highlighting the fact that normal people, everyday people are vegans. So kind of to stop that worry that it's only hippies and all weirdos that are going vegan or whatever. It just show that this is a movement that is going somewhere and it needs to change. So obviously a lot of people have come out from this backlash, and it's kind of got people in two minds of whether it was the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. But from my perspective is that any minority, this is the way to get across. You can't just sit there and go, hey, look, they'll listen to us with me just sitting here quietly. If you look at in the past of any like minorities, like you look at your lesbians, your gays, bis, transsexuals, and all that sort of stuff, they've protested for many years about equal rights in Australia and around the world. Women's rights, a lot of women used to, back in the day, protest for their right to vote, to work, equal rights with salary. So that's still going on now. And then you look at race sort of protests as well. So a lot of slavery was prominent back in the days, but especially in America and in Australia as well, I guess. But these protests had to happen for these minorities to be heard and to be finally listened to. It has taken time for those minorities to get to where they are today. So I feel like it's the same with veganism. Veganism is a minority in Australia and around the world. So these small little acts of protest and being seen in the media and making it a bit more mainstream makes people actually go, oh, we'll look at it in a different light. Maybe not everyone after the protest will go, oh, I'm going to go vegan, but some people will. So I think that's the important thing to take out from this, is that this protest wasn't directed at every single person who was a meat eater, and this was expected to make them turn into vegans because of it. It was first and foremost for the animal rights, and secondary for people to think about going vegan. So obviously you got your people that were like, I'm going to set up a barbecue. I love bacon. What about bacon? These aren't the people that probably would have got anything from this protest, and probably are more frustrated than they were previously against vegans. But the people I feel that I've heard personally have kind of swayed into veganism, or at the very least watched the Dominion documentary, where the people who were considering it already are starting to become a bit more aware of what's happening in the industry, the meat industry, and they've watched the documentary for about 10-15 minutes and they've been swayed already just because of that. So those are the sort of people you're going to have a small percentage of people that are actually going to watch that Dominion documentary now because of those protests. It's making people more aware of those sort of documentaries out there and what is actually happening in that industry. Just after the protest and during the protest, actually, Dominion's trend on Google, I don't know, like it went up 20 times its normal rate, and so did the hashtag vegan. So people are obviously searching and researching this sort of stuff. So again, that's a step in the right direction to push veganism, not so much push it onto people, but make people more aware of what is involved of being vegan, and then they can do their own research from there and kind of become a bit more aware of what is out there. So I guess my channel is a little bit of vegan activism in a subtle sort of way. I'm trying to show people that, coming from a meat eater, going into veganism isn't too difficult. There are a lot of options out there to buy, like from groceries, and also to make recipes as well that could be very similar to what you used to eat. So it's just getting that message out there. So that's my subtle way of doing it. But obviously there are extreme ways to go about it, and each has their own strengths and weaknesses in terms of getting people onto being vegan. Obviously not everyone reacts to the same sort of stimuli that other people do. So for me personally, watching a documentary did sway me to become vegan, and then it kind of snowballed from there. Now, if you're a meat eater and you're watching this, my only recommendation would be to watch a couple vegan documentaries. Dominion is quite confrontal. So depending on your kind of level of what you can watch graphically, because it is quite graphic, then I may suggest watching another documentary called What the Health, which actually gives you a bit more of an insight of corporations who fund a lot of these meat industries and doctors and all this sort of stuff. So it's quite confronting as well, but it kind of gives you an insight of all these different industries and what goes on behind closed doors, and kind of shows to you that we are slowly as a society being manipulated by these higher companies and media as well. So I'm definitely interested in having a discussion about this anytime with anyone, because it's something that's really kind of affected me a little bit. I feel after the protests I was in two minds of where I sat, but at the end of the day, the reason of being a vegan is for the safety and well-being of animals and their rights, because unfortunately they can't be heard. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback as well in regards to all this, and see how you feel if you're vegan and how it made you feel after the protests and the discussions that have led from it now.